I was 24 years old, and I was about to lose the man of my life. Not to another woman, not to distance, not for any of the reasons you imagine when you think about losing someone. I was about to lose him to my father, and the part that still hurts when I remember, the part you might recognize from somewhere in your own life, is that my father believed he was protecting me. Men like that always do. They build the bars with the same hands that fed you, and they call both things love, and for a long time you can't tell one from the other because love and control, when they come from the same source, smell the same. It took me 24 years to learn the difference. Will Cade taught me, not with words, with the way he looked at me when I spoke, like what I said was real, like I was real. Not a name on a fence. Not a daughter to be handed to the right man at the right time. But before I get to him, I need to tell you the before. Because every story has a before. And mine is the part that might reach you deepest. Because it wasn't only him I had to fight for. I had to fight for myself first. That fight did not begin with courage. It began with small moments when I heard my own agreement leave my mouth and knew it was not mine. A dress chosen for a dinner I did not want. A guest was invited because he was considered suitable. A question about the ranch answered over my head, though I knew the answer. None of those moments was large enough to rebel against. Together they formed a life. That is how cages survive. Each surrender seems too small to matter. My name is Evelyn Marsh. My father was the man with the name on the fence, Robert Marsh, owner of the Redstone Ranch, 700 acres of red Texas earth and hard cattle 30 miles from anything you could call a town. In 1883, it was one of the largest cattle operations in Exile County. In 1883, I was the daughter of the man with the name on the fence. That meant everything and nothing. It meant dresses that arrived from San Antonio by order. Dinner with a tablecloth, even when it was only the two of us. Knowing the price of cattle, the name of every branded head, the balance at the Fort Worth Bank, without ever being invited to have an opinion about any of it. My father loved me the way men of that era loved daughters, like something precious that needed to be kept intact until it could be delivered to the right man. He saw no cruelty in that. Neither did I for a long time. When you have never had a thing, you don't feel its absence. You simply learn to call comfort what is actually a very well-decorated cage. I had learned to call it comfort for 24 years. The cage had good curtains, good food, a father who never raised his hand, who worked himself to exhaustion building something he genuinely believed he was building for me. I want to be honest about that because the story I'm telling you is not the story of a villain. It is the story of a man who loved his daughter in the only language he had ever been taught and who never once considered that she might need a different one. That is sometimes the hardest kind of cage to name. The one built by someone who means well. Here is something most people don't know about the Texas frontier in 1883. Nearly half the men who drove cattle across those plains were of Mexican descent or were freed black men who had come west after the war. Hollywood spent decades erasing that, replacing those faces with one kind of man, one kind of story. But the reality of the frontier was different. On the frontier, you were worth what you could do with your hands and your judgment, or at least that was what people said. The truth was more complicated, as truth usually is. Will Cade knew how to navigate that complication better than anyone. He arrived at the Redstone on a Monday in May, son of a Mexican mother and an American father, which in 1883 in Texas was a combination many people used to diminish a man before knowing him. Will let people diminish him. Then he did the work of three. He had worked ranches in New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. Always the best they had, always without staying. No place was his, he told my father at that first conversation, until one was. My father liked that. He shook his hand on the spot. I was at the kitchen window, not looking at Will Cade in particular, looking at the gesture. My father shaking a man's hand with the same grip he used to seal serious business, which was the highest form of respect he knew. I thought, this one will last. I didn't know how much. I didn't know the price. The first time Will Cade spoke to me directly, I was on my knees in the red mud, trying to free a calf tangled in barbed wire. I had been at it for 10 minutes. Any other hand on the Redstone would have dismounted and done it for me within the first 30 seconds because I was Evelyn Marsh, and daughters of ranch owners did not free calves from barbed wire alone. That was the unwritten rule, one of many. Will sat on his horse and watched for those 10 minutes, not with amusement, not with indifference, with the focused attention of a man assessing what someone is actually capable of before deciding what they need. Then he dismounted. But he didn't do it for me. He came to the other side of the fence and showed me where to press, where to fold the wire, and how to hold the calf's neck so it would stop fighting its own rescue. He showed me as if I were capable, as if my inability was only a lack of information and not a lack of nature, which was what everything else in my life had taught me to believe. The calf came free. It stood still for a moment, stunned, then walked off toward the pasture like nothing had happened. Will Cade nodded at the work I had done, not at me, at work. Then he mounted and rode away without another word. I stayed on my knees in the red mud with my hands cut from the wire and understood, without words yet, without a name for it, that something had shifted. What unsettled me was that he had waited. Everyone else rushed to protect me from struggle before struggle could reveal anything about me. Will allowed me to fail long enough to discover where the failure actually was. There is dignity in that kind of patience. It says, I will not confuse difficulty with weakness. I will not steal the proof that you are capable simply because helping would make me feel useful. I carried that lesson longer than I carried the cuts. The visits to the East Paddock in the early mornings were never called lessons. They were never called anything. They were simply things that happened. Will working near the fence, me riding, and if he noticed something that could be better, he said it. Clean and plain, the way he said everything. I learned to read the weather in the behavior of the horses. I learned that a restless animal 20 minutes before a storm is not nervousness, it is information. I learned the difference between the kind of resistance that asks for patience and the kind that asks for firmness. I learned that Will Cade had an opinion about everything he observed and rarely offered it without being asked, which made him one of the most interesting people I had ever met. Because interesting is not who talks the most. It is who talks when they have something true to say. One morning in October, he told me the cattle my father planned to move through the South Pass before the rains were going to have trouble. The ground in that corridor wet unevenly, he said. He had seen it in Kansas in '81. It would swell the earth and create pockets that didn't show on the surface. You told my father? I asked. I did, he said. He preferred to follow the original plan. I went to my father that afternoon. I used Will's argument word for word, presented as my own, because I knew it was the only way it would be heard. My father changed the route. Afterward, he told me I had a good instinct for cattle. He never knew that instinct had a first and last name. Will knew. When I passed him in the yard the next morning, he said without looking up from his work, "It worked?" "Yes," I said. He nodded. I kept working. That was the moment. Not a lightning strike, not a declaration. A nod. The acknowledgement that something I had done had worked, and that the person who knew what that something was needed no credit to know it. It was the first time in my life I had been treated as someone with capacity. Not potential to be well-married capacity. I was not prepared for what that did to me. I was not prepared for what it would cost. After that, I noticed how often I made myself smaller before anyone asked. I softened opinions into questions. I apologized before disagreeing. At dinner, I let men explain decisions whose consequences I understood. Obedience had become so practiced it felt like temperament. Will never told me to change. He simply answered the full strength of what I said whenever I forgot to weaken it. Slowly, I stopped lowering my voice around him. Then, more dangerously, I stopped lowering it when he was not there. My father found Will's notebook in November. Not by intention. One of the younger hands tripped over it near the stable and brought it to my father, assuming it was something for the ranch. Records, accounts, something useful. It was a diary. My father was a man who respected privacy the same way he respected most things, until he had reason not to. And his daughter's name written in a ranch hand's handwriting was reason enough. I don't know everything that was in it. I know what my father told me that evening in the sitting room with the voice of a man who has found something that confirms what he feared and is angry mostly at himself for allowing the conditions that made it possible. Will had written about our conversations, what I had said about the cattle, what I had said about Walter Haynes, because on one of those mornings at the East Fence, I had spoken about Walter Haynes with the honesty you reserve for people you have stopped performing for. Walter Haynes, 30 years old, a ranch of his own in Abilene, a father who had been my father's friend since the war. Suitable in every way the word suitable was invented to describe. My father had been mentioning his name since August with the natural ease of water moving downhill. Will had written about that conversation with the attention of someone archiving something important. There was nothing improper in those pages. My father knew that. What there was, and this was harder for him than improper, was honesty. There was the portrait of a woman with opinions and intelligence and a quiet dissatisfaction he, Robert Marsh, had not known existed, because he had never asked, because he had never built the conditions for it to be said. That part my father did not mention, but I saw in his face that he had read it. Will was called in the morning. I was at the window, not for the same reason as the first time. For the reason of someone who knows something is being ended and cannot look away. My father spoke for 3 minutes. Will listened without interrupting. When my father finished, Will said something back, short, low, that I couldn't hear through the closed glass. My father answered with one sentence. Will put on his hat, went to the stable, took his horse, and rode out through the main gate without looking back. He did not look at the window. The gate closing behind him carried through the house. It was only iron striking iron, a sound I had heard every day. That morning it sounded final. I remember thinking how easily a person could disappear from your future while the furniture stayed exactly where it was. The clock continued. A cup remained on the table. Nothing in the room acknowledged that the one person who had seen me clearly had been sent away. The world would continue whether I chose my life or not. I came down the stairs faster than I had moved in years. "Father," I said. He was seated. He had the notebook in his hand. "This is finished, Evelyn. You cannot—" He did nothing wrong. I know what he did. He looked at me steadily. "I also know what you did." A pause. "Walter Haynes comes in January." That sentence was a door closing. I went to my room. I stayed until dark. Then I did something I had never done in my life. I took inventory. Like someone counting what a house holds before deciding whether to leave or stay. I had a room. Good clothes. A name that meant something in the county. A future planned by someone else that probably wouldn't destroy me, but that definitely wasn't mine. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have the ranch my father had taught me to love but never taught me to own. I didn't have the only person I had spoken honestly to in years. I counted it all. And then, at 4 a.m, I got up, dressed in my riding clothes, and went to the stable. I found Will Cade 7 miles from the Redstone, camped near the dry creek that marked the east boundary of the property. Not because I knew where he was, because I knew where I would be if I were leaving a ranch at night and needed water for a horse before deciding in the morning which direction to take. I had learned to think like him without noticing when I had started. He heard the horse before he saw me. He was standing when I arrived, hand near his rifle, which he lowered when he recognized the mare. "Evelyn," he said, "just my name. No question yet. I came for you," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Your father is not the one deciding this," I said. "Evelyn." "Don't," I said. "Don't talk me out of it before I finish." He closed his mouth. I took a breath. "You wrote true things about me in that notebook," I said. Things I didn't know anyone had noticed. I am not the Evelyn Marsh my father describes to Walter Haynes. I am the person in those pages. And the only time in my life I have been that person was when I was talking to you. He looked at me steadily. "I didn't come to ask you for anything," I said. "I came to tell you that I am not marrying Walter Haynes. I'm going back to Redstone in the morning, and I'm going to tell my father that. And if you want to ride away after, you ride. But you'll know it wasn't my father who ended this." Will stood looking at me for a long time. Then he said, "You'll lose the ranch." "No," I said. "I'll inherit the ranch regardless. My father has no one else. And if he cuts you off, then I'll work," I said. "I know more about cattle than he thinks. I learned from a good teacher." Something moved across Will's face that I hadn't seen before. Not the calculated Will, the one who weighed consequences. The Will from the notebook. The one who wrote true things at night when no one was watching. He looked at the dark land around us. The Texas night was enormous and silent, the kind of silence that asks you to be honest inside it because there's nowhere to hide. Then he said, very quietly, "I have never stayed anywhere." "I know," I said, "because nowhere was mine." "I know," I said again. He looked at me. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I said, "but I know how to free a calf from barbed wire now." "And I didn't know that before you?" The silence held for a moment. Then Will Cade almost smiled. Almost. I went back to Redstone at dawn. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I had my arguments arranged, my voice steady, my resolve as solid as I had ever held anything. I walked into my father's study where he was already awake, already seated, as if he had not slept either, and I opened my mouth to deliver the speech I had built in the dark 7 miles away. My father spoke first. "I read everything he wrote," he said. "Not just your name, everything." I waited. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the light through the window changed. Then he said something I had not prepared for, something I had not in 24 years heard him say in any form. "I didn't know you," he said. "I thought I did. I built all of this." He stopped. "I built it believing I knew you, and that notebook showed me a woman I had never met. Because I never asked." He looked at his hands. "Your mother would have asked," he said. "She always said I listened to land better than to people." The room was very still. I didn't know what to do with what he was giving me. It didn't look like an apology. It didn't sound like one either. But it was the closest Robert Marsh could get, and I had spent enough years studying the language of that man to know when he was saying the most he knew how to say. My anger did not disappear when he said it. Love does not erase the years it misunderstood you simply because it finally becomes honest. But something inside me loosened. For the first time, my father was not the author of my future. He was a flawed man who had mistaken provision for understanding. I could see the cost of his blindness without denying the love behind it. and he could finally see that protecting a daughter from every risk could become another way of refusing to know her. "Bring him back," my father said. I looked at him. "I need a foreman," he said. "I have needed one since June, and apparently my daughter understands better than I do who is right for the work." He picked up the account ledger from his desk. I opened it, did not look up. "That is all I'm going to say about it," he said. That was everything. Will came back to the Redstone not as a ranch hand, as foreman, with the wage and the title and the unspoken understanding with my father that was never put into words because it didn't need to be. Some agreements between men of that era were made in silence and held better for it. 2 years later, we were married on the Redstone porch because I was not a woman who needed an audience for what was real. My father stood beside me. Will stood across from me with the expression of a man who has finally found the place that is his and is still slightly surprised by it. I inherited the Redstone when my father died. 4 years after that, I inherited it with the Marsh name on the deed and Will Cade beside me in reality, which was the right combination. The name that opened doors and the man who knew what to do when the doors were open. But here is what I need you to understand before this story ends. It wasn't Will who freed me. I know that is not what you expect me to say. We love the story of the person who arrives and changes everything. It is a beautiful story. It is also, in my experience, incomplete. Will was the mirror. He was the place where I finally saw clearly what had always been there. His attention, his honesty, his notebook, those things showed me a version of myself that I hadn't been able to see. Not because she didn't exist, but because no one had ever pointed a light in that direction. But the woman who got up at 4 a.m. and rode 7 miles into the dark, that was not Will. That was me. And I am telling you this because I know there are women listening who have been through things far harder than a father who loved in the wrong language. Women who had their voices taken in ways that left marks that don't show on the surface. Women who have learned to call survival what is actually adaptation to a life that was never supposed to be theirs. To those women, I want to say this. The people who see us clearly, the ones who treat us as capable before we believe it ourselves, who write true things about us in private notebooks, who show us without doing it for us, those people are gifts. Receive them. But they are mirrors, not rescuers. The moment that changes everything is never the moment someone arrives. It is the moment you decide to get up at 4 a.m. in the dark with no guarantee of what you'll find 7 miles out. That moment belongs to you alone. And here is what I know now, 40 years on, sitting on the porch of a ranch that bears my name and his work in every fence post and every acre of healthy grass. The bravest thing I ever did was not confront my father. It was deciding, in a quiet room in the middle of the night, that the inventory didn't add up, that the life I had didn't match the life I was, that the distance between those two things was not acceptable. Everything else followed from that one quiet decision. Everything. Before you go, I want you to sit with one question. Not about love, not about the man or the ranch or any of it. Just this. If you did the honest inventory tonight, what you have, what you don't have, what you've been calling comfort because the alternative is too hard to look at, what would you find? And if you found it, what would you do at 4 a.m? Because the door is already there. It has always been there. The only question is whether you decide to open it.